This is The Practicing Christian, and this report is on Christian practice, freedom or destiny. For 2 millennia, Christian thinkers and warriors and farmers and poets have wondered, is God in direct control of every little thing that we do and of what happens around us as well? Jesus taught us that aren't 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground apart from your Father. And even the hairs of your head are all counted. So don't be afraid. You're of more value than many sparrows. That's from Matthew, 10th chapter, 29th verse. But we wonder, isn't our free will and the randomness of things working to bring events about? The 2 towering figures in Christian theology come to mind over this: Augustine and John Calvin. The one influencing Catholic thinking, the other Protestant ideas. Both believed that God controlled our destiny. Augustine tried to reconcile his beliefs about free will, especially the belief that humans are morally responsible for their actions, with his belief that one's life is predestined. Calvin emphasized the sovereignty of God and divine predestination, a doctrine that for him meant that God chooses those who will enter heaven based on his omnipotence and grace. We ordinarily think of ourselves as making our decisions and acting on these. I'll give $250 this year to help Christians free slaves in Africa. Or, I think my cousin Althea is an idiot for marrying that clown Jeff. I'm not going to go to their wedding. But some would say that while we do have free will, God knows in advance what we're going to freely do. That's not predestination. It's foreknowledge. But those who like predestination often say that God made these decisions for us or knew what we'd decide to do thousands of years before we were born. Calvin didn't do that, though. He affirmed man's free will, but thought that it was rather worthless unless men were to be guided by God towards life-giving decisions. Calvin depicts this transformation as, quote, a new heart and a new spirit. That's from Ezekiel 18:31. And he writes, it sets one free from bondage to sin and enables piety towards God and love towards men, general holiness and purity of life. That's from his volume of the Institutes, volume 3, 6, and 16. Besides the way we were reared to make decisions and think things out, which seems to go against some of this, we have the Bible reading, quote, again I saw that under the sun the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor bread to the wise, nor riches to the intelligent, nor favor to the skillful, but time and chance happen to them all. Ecclesiastes 9, verse 11. Well, what's a poor practicing Christian to do? Some of the Christian men with whom I speak are clear on this. They see God as giving us free will because he wants our love, which cannot be coerced. Other Christian men see that God has elected many of us to salvation and wants us to be secure in that election and in his governance of the world. Still others allow that God has enormous control over us and our world. This includes scholastics such as Thomas Aquinas. More specifically, the scholastics, including Aquinas, rejected what would now be called incompatibilism. They held that humans could do otherwise than what they do. Otherwise, the concept of sin is meaningless. As for the Jesuits, their concern was to reconcile the claim of God's foreknowledge of who would be saved with moral agency. The term compatibilism itself was coined as late as the 20th century. But even here, with this idea, things get confused. Jacobus Arminius, a Reformed theologian who differed with Calvin but still affirmed man's total depravity, wrote that free will is unable to begin or to perfect any true and spiritual good without grace. Well, Orthodox Christians, both Eastern and Oriental, and Roman Catholics and Mennonites affirm the freedom of the will. What I observe in most thoughtful Christians is a strong sense that God has set up a good system for getting us into his kingdom after the general resurrection of the dead occurs. Despite our fallen, that is, broken and inadequate natures, we can turn to God and ask for help in getting our faith and practice together. It's perhaps as if we had a powerful electric generator ready to power our lives, but we haven't got our fuel source hooked up sometimes. Asking for help is asking for his grace to empower us to be faithful, trusting, practicing Christians. And if we're doing that, most people who favor predestination would say, well, we must be one of the elect, or we wouldn't even be asking about this. And the free will people would perhaps simply say some version, well, of course, you must be a faithful, believing man because you chose to be this kind of person. There's a difference here, but perhaps just barely. We're not recommending that you examine different views and just take a midway position. That's a low-rent way to do things. We're observing that both predestination-oriented and free will-oriented men understand God's concern for their salvation. They're just struggling in different ways to understand how it's implemented and what, if anything beyond faith, is required of them. You may be able to help them see the one overarching reality. God is never going to leave one of his newly reborn sons twisting in the wind. Blessed assurance will be yours. Jesus, as he was about to teach what we call the Lord's Prayer, or the Our Father, said, "Your Father knows what you need before you ask him. But strive first for the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. So don't worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will bring worries of its own. Today's trouble is enough for today." And that's from Matthew 6:8 and verses 33 and 34. So stop obsessing. He loved you enough to sacrifice his son for you. He won't try now to make life more difficult for you. Serve then. Be the king's right arm.